In the case of some video game sequels, the changes can do more than just build on the parts of the old game. They can completely replace them. In order to facilitate a new concept, the game developers might be forced to scrap some of the old ideas, and that could even include the game's original story. Although sometimes such changes might be necessary, they still go down as frustrating betrayals of their source material. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are 10 video game sequels that broke canon. Number 10. Warlocks are legal again. World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is known to constantly retcon minor details regarding its universe. Some retcons can even have a pretty major impact on the game's story and characters, like the complete change of Aegwyn's personality, for example. However, even changes like this seem minor when compared to what Blizzard had to do with the canon of the original Warcraft series in order to incorporate it into their MMORPG sequel. The story of Warcraft 3 ended with Thrall banishing all warlocks from the Horde for their dealings with demons and their crimes during the war. Given what Gul'dan had done in the game and the fact that orcs used to be enslaved by demons, this decision seemed to be the logical conclusion to the story. However, in World of Warcraft, warlocks are somehow returned to the Horde without any mention of their banishment. This is obviously because the game included the warlock class in its roster, and not allowing one side to use it would make WoW less fun to play. Still, this change in lore seriously undermines Thrall's accomplishments in Warcraft 3 and creates a confusing gap in the story. Number 9. Templars and Lyrium, Dragon Age. There are numerous inconsistencies between all Dragon Age games. Some characters can die in one game due to player choices, but then be reintroduced in another. In those cases, the writers try to come up with an explanation as to how they managed to survive, but this fix becomes much harder when it comes to explaining inconsistencies in lore. In Dragon Age Origins, if the player speaks to Alistair about his Templar training, he'll mention that the Templars use lyrium in order to enhance their abilities. When asked if lyrium is necessary in order to learn Templar abilities, he'll decline and say it merely makes the abilities more potent. Dragon Age Inquisition says something completely different, however. The game makes a point to showcase that Templars cannot use their abilities without access to lyrium. This change was likely made to give the red lyrium crisis in the game a bigger impact on the Templar factions. While it may seem like a minor retcon, this change of lore is actually detrimental for your characters in Origins and Dragon Age 2. According to the new lore, since they didn't have access to lyrium, they shouldn't have been able to learn these abilities. Number 8. Silver's Fate, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Although Sonic 06 was a disaster, the characters it introduced into the world of Sonic the Hedgehog have clearly struck a chord with fans. Silver and Blaze became permanent additions to Sonic's squad, even though, canonically, their existence should have ended along with the story of their debut title. There are a number of reasons why Silver's existence in the Sonic franchise goes against the game's story. First of all, Silver is from the future. He wouldn't be born for another 200 years after the events of Sonic 06. Of course, you could assume he simply stayed in the present after the crisis was over, but there's still another problem. Silver isn't just from any random version of the future. He's specifically from the timeline where Mephiles destroyed the world. His own psychic powers were a result of him growing up in that timeline. So shouldn't Silver cease to exist when the future is fixed? Maybe this is just what happens when stories try to tackle messy concepts like time travel. But in any case, Silver becoming part of Sonic's gang really doesn't make a ton of sense in the franchise's canon. Number 7. The many changes to God of War. With the recent success of 2018's God of War and its surprising yet effective change in tone, it might come as a surprise to some that the series doesn't really have a great track record when it comes to keeping the story consistent. As good as Sony's storytelling is, little bits and pieces of the lore keep getting changed from one game to the next. For example, in God of War 2, Kratos learned about his relationship to Zeus after accidentally killing Athena. In The Ghost of Sparta on PSP, the secret was revealed to him by his mother early in his life. Then in God of War 3, the information is relayed directly by Gygas. There are many other inconsistencies like this in the game's canon. However, one of the most jarring came when God of War 2 was released. At the end of God of War 1, Kratos becomes the God of War and supposedly holds this position until the end of time. The game even shows pictures of modern wars, claiming that Kratos has watched over them. This, however, contradicts the fact that Kratos no longer holds this position in later games, starting with God of War 2. Number 6. Changing the Galaxy, Mass Effect Andromeda. It's fair to say that Mass Effect Andromeda made a lot of enemies in the series' community. However, as if the poor graphics, buggy missions, and barren gameplay weren't enough reasons to hate the game, it also managed to ruin some of Mass Effect's lore. Because the game takes place in the past, a lot of the new concepts it tries to introduce to the series simply don't make sense in context. The events of the game happen merely 20 years after humans have achieved space travel, and yet they've already managed to build the ODSY drive, which is far more superior to any type of engine seen in the other games. The Andromeda Project scientists wanted to take a Krogan aboard to cure them of the genophage, but at the time, the Turians and Solarians were still adamant about keeping the Krogans subjected to it. Now, if these concepts were introduced after the events of the 3 Mass Effect games, they would likely make for compelling plot points. However, since the game is technically a prequel, they just contradict the canon of the main Mass Effect storyline. Number 5. Everything about Shelob, Middle-earth Shadow of War. Shadow of War's decision to give Shelob, the terrifyingly oversized spider from The Lord of the Rings, the appearance of a random supermodel was met with quite a radical range of opinions in 2017. However, the changes to Shelob's character weren't purely aesthetic. The game's creators decided to give Shelob's personality a makeover as well. Instead of being a one-dimensional, all-devouring monster, Shelob was given some depth, with a surprising and tragic backstory of being betrayed by Sauron and then serving as an advisor of sorts to the vengeful Talion. The game's version of Shelob was far more sympathetic than just a creature, and at times she even acted in an honorable and compassionate way. While this may feel like a betrayal of her character in the books, it was still an interesting rendition and did a great job of presenting a different, more realistic version of the evil beasts of Middle-earth, which is what the series was trying to do in the first place. Number 4. Copperhead is a woman, Batman Arkham Origins. Although the Arkham series had stayed very faithful to the Batman comics, some things obviously had to be changed. A handful of villains on Batman's roster had been reimagined for the sake of the series. Some had undergone such drastic changes, in fact, that their entire lore had to be rewritten. The Copperhead from the comic books is a mercenary villain who, at first, was just a man in a snake costume. At some point in his life, he made a deal with a demon, which transformed him into an actual human-lizard hybrid, complete with a giant snake head and a long tail to constrict his enemies with. The Copperhead introduced in Arkham Origins was nothing like this. Instead of being a more snaky version of Killer Croc, the new Copperhead was reimagined as a female assassin who used her arsenal of snake-like weapons and mastery of escape art to take down her enemies. She was given a more playful and sadistic personality and the unique background of being a gang member from Central America. Curiously enough, this new version of Copperhead gained the attention of DC Comics, and they eventually decided to make her an official part of the Batman canon. Number 3. Creation of the Master Sword, The Legend of Zelda. Given the complexity of the official Zelda timeline, it shouldn't be surprising that some of the elements of the lore don't really work together. Despite Nintendo's efforts to combine all the game's storylines into one consistent tale, not all the information presented by each game matches. This also applies to the origin of the most iconic weapon in the Legend of Zelda franchise, the legendary Master Sword. In Link to the Past, upon picking up the Master Sword, the player was given a short description of the weapon, which informed them that the weapon was created by the people of Hyrule. Twilight Princess expanded upon this information by specifying that it was the ancient sages who forged the sword with magic. This link, no pun intended, between the two games stopped making any sense once Skyward Sword was released. The title was meant to serve as a prologue for all the other games, but its take on the origin of the Master Sword doesn't fit in with any of them. In Skyward Sword, it's not the Hylians, but their goddess Hylia who created the weapon. She transforms the Spirit of Fi, Link's companion in the game, directly into it. Number 2. Pre-War Jet, Fallout 4. Jet is one of the most well-known items in Fallout lore. It's a special kind of drug that can be inhaled in order to slow down the user's perception of time and allow them to perform actions much faster. The history of the drug was revealed in Fallout 2, but as it turns out, eventually Bethesda decided to throw that explanation out the window for no good reason at all. In Fallout 2, the player met Myron, a creepy but talented chemist who claimed that the Jet formula was invented by him. This turned out to be a lie, as Myron merely discovered a pre-war formula in Reno. Still, Myron was the one who invented the Jet inhaler, which is why, according to game designer Joshua Sawyer, the Jet used in the games couldn't be found in pre-war pharmacies in New Vegas. It can, however, be found in pre-war research facilities all across Fallout 4. In Vault 95, which contains Vault-Tec's rehab center for drug addicts, Jet is found in every corner. The computers in the vault claimed that it had been shipped there before the war, but that couldn't be true as its design is identical to Myron's Jet. Number 1. Professor Oak didn't invent the Pokédex, Pokemon Legends Arceus. Arceus did a lot to reinvent the classic JRPG Pokemon formula. It added new mechanics and new forms of battle, but also some weird changes to the game's canon. According to the original Pokemon games and most of the titles that followed, the invention of the Pokédex was attributed to none other than Professor Oak. The band said so in the very beginning of your adventures in Pokemon Red and Blue. This information was further confirmed by professors in later games, as well as by some other NPCs discussing the legacy of Oak's research. When Arceus came out, this whole part of the lore was flipped on its head. The game took place in the distant past, where Arceus had transported a bunch of people from different timelines through mysterious portals. The world was ancient, and there weren't any Pokédexes to speak of, so the main protagonist of the game had to create one in the form of a book. That book became the first ever catalogue of Pokemon species, something that Oak's device was supposedly meant to accomplish first. This means that either Oak is a fraud, Arceus broke Pokemon's canon regarding the Pokédex, or both. That's the end of our list, but do let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other video game sequels that broke canon. As always, I've been Jess from What Culture. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm @JessMcDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists.